Welcome to the Small Church Podcast, the podcast for church leaders who want to make a difference in their communities. We're your hosts, Tony Marr and Bruce Montgomery, and we're excited to be with you today. On this podcast, we'll be discussing the latest trends, strategies, and ideas for effective leadership in small-sized churches. So whether you're a pastor, a ministry leader, or a volunteer, this podcast is for you. Each week, we'll bring you interviews with experienced church leaders who have valuable insights to share. We'll also explore topics like team building, community outreach, spiritual growth, and much more. So if you're looking for practical advice and inspiration to help you lead your church with excellence, you've come to the right place. The Small Church Podcast is brought to you by Higher Ministries. Higher Ministries is an organization that exists to help Christian leaders in the churches they serve through coaching and consulting, all for little or no cost. For more information on Higher Ministries or to find out more about the Small Church Podcast, please visit higherministries.com. Thanks for tuning into this week's edition of the Small Church Podcast. Welcome to the Small Church Podcast. I'm your host, Tony Marr, along with my co-host, Bruce Montgomery, and we are very excited to be with you today. Bruce, you've had a crazy couple of weeks with purchasing a new house, and you're in the middle of moving, and so I know the life is a little chaotic right now. I'm so glad that you could be here with us this morning.
Well, I'm glad to be anywhere. I've been homeless for about 7 weeks now, it seems like. My son-in-law and daughter took us in when we sold our house almost within the days in which we put it up. And we didn't anticipate being that successful. And we were building a house, so now we actually have 3 generations living in my daughter and son-in-law's house. And it's interesting. It's difficult at times, but it's kind of wonderful at times. But all of us are ready for it to end. And we finally have gotten into the house, and we'll get moved in on Monday. But my wife's there right now, and I'm praise the Lord here, not moving boxes.
Well, your new house is done, it's completed, but you're still living with the kids, and you should be into your new house fully settled in a couple days, a week?
By Monday.
Monday.
The movers come Monday, the refrigerator comes Friday, and I think hopefully for Carol and I, peace comes on Tuesday, and we're looking forward to it. It's a needed change. As we aged, we had to move to something where we were on one floor and less things to take care of. And it's going to be a change for us. Just like when you're in a ministry, things change. You have to adapt to the change and work it through and be a team. And Carol and I are a team. And we work together very well. Well, I think we work with it well, especially if I take her criticism and accept it and work on it. We work really well. So we're ready for this to begin to settle down for us.
Good. Well, Bruce, today we're talking about something that is your area of expertise, and that's effective communication in leadership in small churches. You have a PhD in organizational communication,
yes.
And so this is something that you have both studied, learned, taught and practiced for years, right up your alleyway here. So I'm really excited to dive into this with you today, and you can share the knowledge that you have put onto students as a professor for the last, 25, 30 years. Now, hopefully some people that maybe haven't had the opportunity to sit under your teachings will get some great insights and ideas that can help them be better communicators and better communicate the message that they're trying to get across to their church and their community.
Well, I hope so. My goal, and even in getting the PhD, was not honestly to get the PhD. It was to get information to help the church. I was a campus minister, and I was having success with students, and had a number of churches I had relationships with, and saw what they were doing and going through and succeeding in and not succeeding in. And it just made me give me a drive to learn more about communication. And there was a thing called as church growth literature out there, and that's all interpersonal communication, basically. And I took that and learned and ran with it, and I think that it came where I could be helpful to the church, and that's what I wanted. PhD was secondary. It was the purpose was to help the church, help ministers to communicate more effectively, and to have fuller lives because they're not feeling guilty all the time. and not trying to figure things out, but having a way of planning what they're doing. And so that's kind of why I went where I did, because I needed it, and I figured other people did too. So church growth is just for me a subset of communication, organizational management, those kind of things. That's where the church growth literature comes from.
So, Bruce, why do you think there's such a void in communication, not only in the church and not only in the small church, but it feels like there's a void in communication in society?
Part of it is we all want to have our pulpit. Everybody wants to do the talking, and nobody wants to do the listening. And I think it's more prevalent today in our American society than I ever have seen before. If you say something and I don't agree with you, then I'm just going to shut you out. I'm going to shout you down. I'm going to do something else and walk away. Where in the past, people would at least listen to what's going on. I just finished a book on communication in our society now as it is and how it works. And Aristotle had a plan, and Aristotle's plan worked for communication. It's dated, but the things and principles he had were listen to the other person, think about what the other person's saying, respond to the other person. And what we have in society today is listen to the other person. How can I attack that? There is no listening. There is no empathy. There is no soothing of anybody. It's almost all attack right away. And that's what I'm seeing in society, and sometimes I see it in the church. So communication means, number one, we talked about just before we got on, one of the most important skills in communication is to listen.
Yeah.
If you don't listen to the other person, how do you know what to respond to? If you don't listen to the other person, how do you know what they're thinking? You would need to know what they're thinking to be able to talk with them and communicate with them and meet the needs. I taught storytelling, and Tony, you're one of those people who has gone on in the storytelling and gotten a master's degree in storytelling, and because it's an effective way that people will listen. And we got to find ways in the church to get people to stop and listen. I found in church, and I think you probably do, Tony, when you preach, I get up there, and the minute I start into a story, everybody relaxes. The audience gets silent. That's the way you know the audience is listening. There's no rustling of papers. There's no coughing. There's no messing around. You have people actually really listening to what you're saying. And when you're speaking, it's not when they're laughing. That's not the prime time. The prime time when you know they're listening is they're totally quiet. And that's what I look for whenever I speak. And I think when you tell stories, the same thing happens. I know it happens. And when you tell the story, people just sit back. And so for preachers, one of the things I think you can do and put in your arsenal is storytelling. And not just a story here within the message. Try practicing putting the message into story.
Yeah. Bruce, I think one of the big issues that we have with communication is that people think that their audience already has the information. And so they think that they already know it, and so they don't need to communicate it. I know that's something that I've often struggled with, and that is honestly a big personal struggle and frustration for us right now in dealing with some different areas with our kids and youth groups, and the dispensing of information doesn't happen. The communication doesn't happen like we would like it to. And I think a lot of it is because people think that people already have the information. A great example of this is I spend a lot of time looking at other churches and websites. And when I'm not teaching somewhere, I love to visit other churches. I am amazed at the number of churches that you go onto their website and nowhere on their website does it say what time their services are or where they are located. Basic forms of basic information. And they think that, well, someone's going to know it. Of course, the people that go to church there know what time the services are and know where they're located. But your website is one of your primary forms of communication, one of your primary methods of communication. maybe the main method of communication to people that don't go to your church. And so critical information that is the reason that people are coming to your church is so often left off of this mean of communication. And I see that happening over and over and over again, even in our teaching and preaching, that I had to get to a place where I started writing my messages as if I was teaching to someone who had never been in church before and had zero biblical knowledge and background. Because I found if you assumed that someone knew something, even basic biblical principles that you would think everyone who sat in those little plastic uncomfortable chairs in Sunday school saw these stories come to life on their flannel graph growing up, that they should know these things. And the number of times that after getting done at a church, had someone come up and talk to me and say, I didn't know what you're talking about. I had no idea. I'd never heard that before. And it was things that I thought even people who didn't grow up in the church would know these basic principles or basic stories. And so the fact of communicating with the understanding of ignorance on behalf of your listener is something that is greatly overlooked and oftentimes just missed.
I hate to use the word ignorance, lack of knowledge for your audience, not knowing what's going on. I see that when you were talking about that, I saw what's happening right now in our society is chosen. And chosen is taking the story and putting it into a way that people grasp it, and people are listening to it. I didn't know that happened. Did Jesus really do that? And so we make assumptions. Don't assume. Always be clear on what you want to talk about. You know, when you're preaching, when you're talking to people and get a message, you have one point and one point only. You have three or four subpoints, but you only have one target point, and you want to make that the emphasis of all you do. So you start out, you tell them what you're going to tell them, then you tell them, and you tell them what you told them. That's basic speech. That's basic Aristotle. That's basic successful communication. Is that you assume that you're giving them information that they don't have, or you're modifying the information that they do have. But in doing so, you have to have creative redundancy. You have to be able to say it within that message in two or three different ways, so the different people will pick up on it. Some people like one way of looking at life. Some way, like are touchers. Some people are visual. Some people are audio. And you want to make sure that what you're doing covers those different things. But when you're talking to people, you're right, Tony. Sometimes we start at a level above what their net level is. When I first went into campus ministry and back in 1973, I was working with all these really bright college students who had no knowledge of the Bible. And that was amazing to me, but they were product of our society. We have a lot of people out there who have a Bible, but they don't know where it is. There are families that used to have Bibles on the somewhere in the living room, so you could see it, the family Bible, but they don't have that. I haven't seen that anymore. Most of the people who use their Bibles today use an iPad or something electronic. I do because my eyes are bad. I can see better. But don't assume that they're reading it, and don't assume that they know or understand what the message was. Even if you've just watched a video of it, it's nice for somebody to explain what culturally is happening at that point in time and why that would have happened. And so you add to the experience. Just think about how do we take in information? In storytelling, the same way, you have 5 fingers, don't you? You have 5 tools of ways in which we take in information. And so you try to use all of them when you're speaking, and that's going to help your audience and make it easier for them to want to listen to you. I loved it when I would finish a sermon and people say, "I wish you'd have kept going," or "I'd like to know more." That means I've got next week's sermon started and can go on. But I don't want to tell them everything I know in one sermon.
Right.
I'll tell. We have a friend, and if he hears this, he'll know who I'm talking about. When I heard him preach before he went in the ministry, when I heard him to preach, I went because my kids wanted me to go to the church they're going to, and he was preaching that day. He after an hour-long service, he preached for an hour and a half, and at the end, I was furious. He says when I walked up to him, "I can help you." And we did. We began to meet and talk about things. He had 7 ideas. He had 7 topics, kind of interrelated, but nobody's going to be their rear ends aren't going to take 7 all that time. So I told him, if you're in a church, that you just wasted 7 weeks. And so you better have a good repertoire of sermons, or you're going to be changing over quite a bit. And so as we do that, as preachers, as communicators, one thing in the message. If you put a message out in an email, one emphasis, that's all they're going to walk away with. And if they're like me, I start into an email, and if it's over 3 lines long, I quit reading the email because the email is a short bit of information. It's not a real long thing. And I've even had people I've worked with said, "What do you think of my idea?" And I said, "What about your idea?" And quickly they learned, I'm not going to read down past the 5th line on an email. That's about the longest I'm going to go, because I'm going through emails fast. And so I want them to get that. So we live in a fast-paced world. So if we're in a fast-paced world, then we need to realize that we got to get one bullet for that message, and we want them to get that. And so everything we do supports it, and we bring it back. So we start out there. You tell them what you're going to tell them. You tell them what you told them.
I like that.
And that's just simple communication, and don't assume people know. And if they look, and be confident enough if you're looking at your audience and they're looking like you, like, huh, and their eyes are glazed over, then you ought to have a way to change that, switch up in the middle to get a better grip with your audience, get better communication with them. You need to look at your audience. You need to be prepared, but you need to look at your audience and make eye contact with them and see if they're tracking with you, and see if they are, they're resonating with you, wonderful. But if they're not, then you modify.
Bruce, in talking about communication within the small church, I think that a lot of times people feel misinformed. We touched a little bit on this earlier, and they just don't know what the church is doing, what the purpose is, what the point is, what's happening as far as events and where the church is going. How important is it for a church to communicate their vision clearly and consistently?
I think it's vital that the people know where you're going. Tony and I talked earlier about one of my metaphors for ministry is coaching, but another one is Wes Seligler came up with Western Christianity, and he came up with a wagon train, and the church is a wagon train moving on, and the Holy Spirit was the scout, and the preacher was the cook. He's the one who took what all the meat and things that the scout brought to them and made it edible and helped them to sustain what's going on. But realizing that you're moving, the church is not static. But if you're moving, where am I moving to? That's Carol and I with the last maybe 2 or 3 months, we're moving. We know we're going to move. Where are we moving to?
Yeah.
And what's where we're living to going to be like? And
you had hope that you were going somewhere.
Yeah,
you had a destination that you were getting to.
And we're still hoping that we're getting into the destination and moving and settling in and adapting to what we have to adapt. But we had to have a place to go. I think your congregation that wanders in the wilderness dies like the children of Israel in the wilderness. It needs to have a destination. If you look at the Bible, Joshua had a map to follow, and he followed the map that God gave him. And so we have to set it out, and it's not going to be scriptural, but with support from Scripture. But as we set out what we're doing in the church, it needs to stay within our mission. So we need to understand our mission. Then we need to understand our audience, and we need to understand then how we're going to put the two together.
We'll spend an entire episode, maybe multiple episodes, talking about mission and vision and the importance of that and how to create your mission and vision. One of the things that I see a lot in small churches, one of the reasons I think that small churches tend to stay small, is they don't have a mission. They don't have a vision. And if they do, it's not communicated to their congregation. So many small churches, if you were to go in and ask the members of their church, people that have attended this church maybe for 20, 30, 40 years, what is the mission of our church? They couldn't tell you. And if they could tell you, it would be something generic. You could go and even ask some of the senior leaders, elders, deacons, staff people of the church, what is our church's mission? What is our church's vision? And outside of giving a generic, to reach people for Christ, which is the mission, the vision of every church, to see people come to know Christ, I don't know that they could give you a specific mission for their church. And if it is there, if you do have that, it needs to be communicated. Your people need to know that. It's why one of the principles we talk about that we'll get into on a future episode is your mission statement should be 10 words or less. It should be something that you should be able to sit down at a coffee shop or after church and write on the back of a napkin. It should be prominently displayed and talked about. It should be something that everyone who has been to your church more than once or twice knows this is what we're about. This is where we're going. No one hops on public transportation without knowing where the destination is. And so why do we expect people to come and get on the bus that we're driving of our church without knowing where it's going?
Right. I think in terms of what you're talking about, just hit me. The very first thing that people do when they move into a new city is they look in the internet for churches. And that's the beginning of what we would call socialization. That's the pre-encounter. And so they look at that, and so somewhere in that you need to clearly state your mission, what you want to do. And then when they come, you need to have that mission still displayed to them so they see that you're really doing what you said you want to do. And it's easy to have missional drift. We've had this mission for a while. We just assume it's there. Well, okay, this didn't work, but we can adapt this and put it into it. That's not healthy. If you're going to make some changes, change your mission statement and really have a target that you're going for. If you're an archer and you shoot at a target that you don't know where it is, you're going to hit the target every time because there is no target. And there was a story that a communication story came about that this man in England was the greatest archer in all of England. But he didn't believe it, so he wanted to go around. He wanted to find the best archer in England, and he wanted to take lessons from him and have him tutor him. And so he traveled all around and never could find until after months and months of travel, he came to a place, and everywhere he looked, there was a target with an arrow right in the middle of it, and he knew he'd found the master to learn from. So he went and knocked on the guy's door. The man opened his door, and he said, I would like to have you disciple me, to teach me, because you're obviously the best archer of all, because everywhere I see, your arrows are right in the heart of the target. And can you teach me? He says, I can do that easily enough. You shoot an arrow, it hits the tree, and you go paint circles around it. That's what we do, I think, sometimes in church. We don't really have a target until we get down the road, and then we paint circles around what we're doing. Make it clear. In your messages, make it clear. In your advertising, make it clear. On the internet, wherever you go, make it clear. Wherever you can do that, make sure that you're clear about what you're doing, and that people know that, and that they can tell others. Just Sunday morning, an older couple just moved here, came here, and in the first week they're here from New York, they came to church. And they found my wife because she was looking for somebody else that we'd invited to church. And they just started asking her questions and questions and questions and questions. And soon they were sitting with us like good friends. And they wanted to know all about our church. Are we going? Are we doing? What are we doing? And our people ought to be able to articulate that.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. They should be able to. But how many actually can? And so I think that it's important that we have consistent messaging, consistent messaging that is aligning all of the congregation's efforts together, that we are all working and going towards that one goal. So Bruce, one of the things that I remember from first meeting you back when you were my professor decades ago, one of the classes that I still fall back on and talk about all the time was an interpersonal communication class. How important are strong relationships and interpersonal communication within the church community?
I think they're vital. There was a time in my life when I wasn't sure if I wanted to be in the ministry anymore, and so Carol and I made an excursion into a parachurch thing. I didn't want to go all the way out of ministry, but I wanted to go. I thought I needed to move out. Thought I was dried up. After a year working with them, I was back in the ministry and happily back in the ministry. It wasn't they were a bad organization, but it wasn't. I didn't have that community of people. I love the church I'm at now, and I love churches when I go in and I see people and they smile when they see me, and I smile when I see them, and we are a community. And I think that the most important thing for people is we have to have other people. We have to connect with other people if we're gonna have a good life. I think relational communication is critical, and we don't do enough of it. We sit in front of the TV. We sit at a movie theater. We drive the car and don't talk to each other. We need to get beyond that, and we need to relate to each other. And even in a high-tech world, I think we ought to be a high-touch world. If we're not touching, figuratively and physically, we're not in relationship in family.
Yeah, I love that. In a high-tech world, we need to be a high-touch world. We have a lot of different ways that we can communicate nowadays, and we'll get into some of these in just a minute. If you're a person that doesn't, if you're an introverted person, let's put it that way, and we all know people that are in ministry and in leadership levels of ministry that don't do great with people. They're introverts. Conversations with people makes them nervous. They do great hiding behind their computer. And when they can communicate through text message or through email, they do really well. But then you get them face to face with someone and they struggle in that. Yeah. What are some ways that someone who maybe is uncomfortable with interpersonal communication, interpersonal relationships, what are some ways that they can break through those barriers and maybe never be great at that, but at least get by?
That other person's not going to hurt you. You got to first of all think about the person that you're talking about, or you come up to. They're not there to hurt you. They're there to maybe be a best friend. And I guess when I started campus ministry again, I go back to that because it was small church for us, and we grew to a big church. But I look for, the scripture says, greet one another with a holy kiss. Okay, now I don't go around kissing people. I think I might get myself put in jail for that or slapped for that. But I look for something in America which could equal that. And in America, what we do is a hard squeezing handshake usually, and you try to squeeze the other person's hand until they give up. But that's what I found out. I just started hugging people. I hug my students. When you were a student in school, and I think Milligan became more of a hugging institution because of that. I hug people in church. If you don't if you don't like being hugged, you better just put your hands up and say stop. But learn to touch. Learn that they're not going to hurt you. That person is there, may become your best friend. But you've got to open up to them, and they've got to open up to you. Self-disclosure. If you don't do those kind of things, you're not going to grow together. So you self-disclose something about yourself, not everything, but something early, and they reciprocate, and that's how the relationship grows. And touch is part of that. I really think COVID did us a real disservice. We were afraid to touch people again. We were in a situation where the church was hugging and doing things, and suddenly COVID came, and we're putting masks on. We're hiding behind the mask. We're not touching each other. We're going to church online, and I'm not opposed to church online, but I also realize that a church online doesn't have community unless you find some way to create it electronically, and I've not found that yet. I'm looking for that and trying to find a way, because we've got people in our church who are coming to church online and asking us, what can we do to grow? And my first answer is, come to church physically. Be a part of the community. Find some way to relate to people, or at least go in your neighborhood and talk about the church and get some relationships that way. But don't try to be a lone ranger. You're not gonna make it, and the Indians will devour you. So you want to do your best you can, and it all begins with that first touch. It all begins with eye contact with the person. It all begins with looking them in the face and talking to them briefly, and then you can go from there. And as that relationship grows, the depth of the things you share will grow.
That's great. Let's talk practically for a few minutes. It's pretty well known in communication circles, in marketing circles, that for your message to stick, it needs to be communicated in several different ways. That different touches in different ways of communication. So the church usually doesn't do a great job of this. So let's talk for a few minutes about the different communication channels that small churches have at their disposal, that every small church, regardless of size, regardless of resources, every small church should be utilizing these channels. And if you're listening right now, and take notes, if you're not utilizing some of these channels, you need to start right now, because all of the research, all of the study, all of the evidence shows that for your listener to really truly grasp and hear what you're trying to communicate, it has to be communicated in several different ways. They have to hit it from several different ways. We process in different ways. We listen in different ways. We learn in different ways. And so we have to be communicating in different ways. Bruce, I think one of the first of those that we've just talked about is in person. Face-to-face communication is still one of the best ways to communicate a message, regardless of what that message is. But that's only one. Mm-hmm. We talked about websites. If your church does not have a good website, hit stop, hit pause on the podcast, and go get a website.
Or contact us and we'll help you get a website, because Tony's really skilled at creating those for us and has done some amazing things. But the first thing they're going to look for when they come to town, as I said before, is a website. No more. They've driven by the building and stuff, but they're trying to explore who you are. Your website needs to tell them.
And your website is a great place for your church members to go to get information.
Oh, yes.
And so I'm amazed at the amount of church websites that you see that haven't been updated in weeks, months, maybe even years. One of the first things I do when I go to a new website is I scroll down to the bottom and I look and see the copyright. And if the copyright says anything other than 2023, I know that church is not doing their due diligence in upkeeping their website and that method of communication. Bruce, there are several other ways that we can communicate digitally. Social media has become a major platform for communication. In fact, for a lot of small businesses, they have even gone away from having an active website, and they use Facebook, Instagram as their primary means of getting information out to their customers, out to their potential customers. The church has done a fairly good job of utilizing this as well. In fact, I'd say a lot of churches have gone the route of placing the priority on social media even over their website. I'm not sure that that's a right choice. I think that you need to have both. You need to have a good website, but you also need to have a good social media presence. But social media is something that if you are not utilizing for your church, you're missing out.
Right. the rule of thumb is you use the best medium or best channel for your message. If you got a message that's really personal, you're going to put it up on a bulletin board, or you're going to put it up on the internet. No, that's a face-to-face kind of thing. I've heard of people going to the ballparks and like the Atlanta Braves playing, and they have "Hey Susie, will you marry me?" come up on the big stand. If I was Susie, I would left. But that's not an appropriate way to do it. And so, in the church's ways, we need to do all of them. We need to hit out there with the website. We need to do social media. We need to do the interpersonal, and so we have to think about that. So, social media has its place, but it's just one of the channels that you can use.
Yeah, I agree. And it's one that you should be using. It's a great way to communicate. I would venture to say probably 80 to 85% of the people in your church are on social media at least daily. And so if you have a message, an urgent message that you need to get across, it is the number one platform for you to get that message across. Bruce, for both of us, back in the old days, we worked at churches, served at churches, went to churches that did the old customary newsletter that was put out and available for you to pick up somewhere in the church lobby after church, or if your church really had a great budget, it was mailed out to you. I don't know of many churches that do a paper newsletter anymore, but digital newsletters are still a very common thing and a very useful way to get out information to your church. There are a lot of options for that. Some are free, some are little to no cost. Some of the easiest ones that even if you have very little expertise in utilizing a computer or technology, Constant Contact, MailChimp are a couple that you can do very nice, very simple newsletters for a very low cost. Constant Contact, I think, is going to cost you about $30 to $40 a month. MailChimp, you can start an account for free and begin sending out your newsletters in just a few short minutes, completely for free.
And I think those are. I'm not use either one. I'm not that part of our ministry that I work with that part. But I look at that and just see that people are busy. They want the shorter messages. When I had my secretary, I would tell her, just here's how I want you to take my mail. Newsletters, put them in a folder. Put them in a folder. And things that are personal, I want to read right away. I sometimes never got to those newsletters. I mean, they're nice to have. They give you some information, but I think we need to do them. Same way with social media, getting out there and doing things. They're important to keep you before your audience. And in creating a new audience, you've got to have some introduction. You got to have some communication with them before you can step up that communication to something else. So use every channel available.
And Bruce, what I think is maybe one of the best channels for getting information out to people in your church that the small church does not tend to utilize very well in many of the churches that I've had the chance to work with is text messaging. Text messaging is quick, it's easy. Everyone has their phone in their hands, in their pocket at all times. And if you want to send out something to get information out to your people quickly, a weather delay, a change in plans, or just information about an event, something going on in your church, there really is no better way than sending out a text message.
And I see the validity of that. It's just it's critical information that has to get out quick. That's one avenue. But I wouldn't just send it out there. I would send it every other way I could also.
Absolutely.
If it's critical, but text messaging, again, from a college professor's perspective, I could send my students a text message and get a response in about 30 seconds.
Yep.
But I think that especially critical messages have to be sent over multiple channels. The more channels you can send it on, the more successful you're going to be.
Yeah. And I want to touch really quick back on the text message that you don't have to have everyone in your church's contact list in a text blast on your phone. There are some great companies out there that are very inexpensive that will keep your database and can instantly, with the touch of a button, send your message out to everyone. You can have them in specific groups. So if you just want to send out a message to parents of student ministries, you can do that. If you just want to send out a message to your men in the church, you can do that. Some of the ones that I've used before that are very, very good and set up for small church use. Text Them All is one that'll cost you about $10 a month is all. They have a free version, but to unlock the full potential of it, you're looking at about $10 a month, which I think even the smallest of churches can do that. Text in Church is a great one that has a lot of features that are very helpful. That one's a little bit more expensive. It's going to cost you about $35 a month there. So the cost might be a little prohibitive for some churches, and also church management software. Your church management software like One Church, Breeze, Planning Center, a lot of those will have texting options within the church management software that you can go right into your CMS and generate a message and send it out to whichever group of people you want that to go out to. So if you're not utilizing that, you need to be utilizing those means of communication and get better at communicating to the people in your church so that they're feeling informed. They're not only informed about the things that are going on in your church, but where you're going in your church, and they're on board. The more people that you have engaged with you on your journey, the quicker you're going to get there.
Exactly. You want people to be effectively ministered to. Give them information. Give them information in various ways so that they won't miss it. And if you do that, I think you'll be successful. And you want to promote your mission, where you're going, and how you're going to get there. That's what people want to know. If I come to your church, what's your church value, and how do you go about things, and what's important to you? And those are the things that we need to promote when we get people who are around.
Bruce, you talked earlier about the importance of narrowing your focus to one main point in your communication. I think that's a great thought when it comes to everything that we've just talked about, with all of the different resources available, all the different channels of communication. If your message on Sunday morning, if you can get that to your one main point, then that main point can be shared in many different ways. On Monday, you can send out a quick blast on Facebook with a nice graphic that's very easy to create that just gives what that point is. You can send out a text message that just gives that one point. You can send out, something through your website that gives the one quick point. That there are many ways. If your message is clear, concise, and to the point, then it's very easy to communicate in various channels and methods to make sure that you're getting the message across.
Right. I heard a comedian once say he got on the wrong airplane, but he was making great time. And we don't want that. We don't. I'm making great time going to Tulsa, but I wasn't going to go to Tulsa, but I'm making great time there. And it's easy to get distracted for your people and for yourself and your ministry. It's easy to something comes up here and something comes up here, and we put this fire out here and put this fire out here and we put this fire out here. Pretty soon we're worn out and everything's burned down. We've got to be able to focus, like Tony said, and we need to that with that focus to really live those things. In fact, Tony just gave me ideas for things I should have done.
Well, Bruce, we are out of time today, and so it has been wonderful hearing all of your expertise. It took me back to the classroom at Milligan College, and so many of the things that you imparted on me years ago that have stuck with me throughout the last 25 years of my life. So I hope that you have enjoyed this episode of the Small Group Church Podcast, that you have heard a lot of things that maybe have inspired you to go out and change some things in your ministry to better communicate your message, the most important message that we have. Thanks for tuning in to this edition of the Small Church Podcast. Be sure to follow us on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. For more information or to get in contact with us, visit higherministries.com. Again, thanks for listening. On behalf of Bruce Montgomery and myself, I'm Tony Marr. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you next time.